Welcome to the Pixels and Projects podcast. All right, so let's dive into this. Remote work, it's reshaped how we operate on so many levels. But one of the biggest shifts I think we can all agree on is team culture, right? When you're not seeing your colleagues in person, those natural spontaneous moments like chatting at the coffee machine or grabbing lunch just vanish. And in their absence, well, it fundamentally changes how we connect.
Oh, yeah. And it's not just a small change either. I mean, think about it. Those little moments, like running into someone and saying, "Hey, how was your weekend?" That's kind of like the glue that keeps us tied together, in person at least.
Exactly. And without those, teams can feel disconnected, like they're operating in silos. And you know what? That affects collaboration, productivity, and honestly, even engagement. It's not something you can just leave on autopilot. Building that connection has to be intentional in a remote setup.
And intentional is the key word here, really. It's not like you can say, "Oh, let's just wait for these relationships to magically grow." You got to create like deliberate opportunities for people to connect. Otherwise, it's like throwing seeds into the wind and hoping they land somewhere?
Yeah, and the good news is it's not an impossible task. Virtual team building, when done right, can actually match, or even sometimes surpass, the effectiveness of traditional in person methods. But the how matters a lot.
Totally. And I love how some teams are using tools to, you know, bridge those gaps. Like, have you seen Donut for Slack? It's such a neat way to connect people who wouldn't normally interact. It like randomly pairs folks from different departments for quick coffee chats.
Yeah, that's a terrific example. What I like about tools like Donut is that they take the guesswork out of it. They're intentional by design. Plus, it's a great way to break down those cross departmental silos that often form in remote setups.
Absolutely. And it's such a simple concept, right? Random pairing, a little time to swap stories or share ideas. Suddenly, you've got people connecting in ways they wouldn't have on their own. It just makes remote work feel, I don't know, a little more human.
Yeah. And when these tools are part of a strategy, not just a one off, they really lay the groundwork for stronger team dynamics. It's deliberate connection making at its best.
Talking about tools like Donut just reminds me how simple but effective these virtual coffee connections can be. They're such an easy way to get people talking and start breaking down those silos we all dread in remote teams.
Right? And what makes those so effective is how unstructured they feel. You're not forcing a meeting agenda on people. It's just, I don't know, casual enough to let connections happen naturally, but intentional enough to make sure they actually occur. And tools like Donut automate that process beautifully. It's, well, really smart design.
Oh, yeah. And it's funny too, because you could end up talking to someone you might never work with otherwise. Like someone in finance chatting with someone from security. That's not going to happen otherwise, not in most cases.
Exactly. And I think those conversations can spark surprising ideas. Plus, they help keep teams from feeling too isolated within their own little worlds.
Totally. And hey, speaking of connections, you know what else works? Those non work Slack or Microsoft Teams channels. I've seen companies do things like hashtag book club or hashtag pet lovers. And honestly, it's like the easiest way to recreate that office. Hey, here's a picture of my dog vibe.
Oh, those are fantastic. It's very much about giving people a space, an intentional space, for the kind of small talk that builds relationships. And when teams share hobbies or interests, it makes the culture even stronger.
Exactly. Like creating these spaces where people can bond over stuff that has nothing to do with deadlines or deliverables. It's such a breath of fresh air and helps your team see each other as well, people.
Yeah, and speaking of creating spaces, establishing team rituals fits right in here. I've seen some teams do things like Friday wins, where everyone shares an accomplishment from the week, or Monday motivation talks to kick off the week right.
Oh, those are great examples. And I mean, they're not just for fun either. These rituals, small as they might seem, they build that sense of we're in this together. That's invaluable for a remote team.
It's all about consistent touch points. They're like these little anchors, helping everyone feel connected and aligned, even when they're miles apart. And honestly, even a quick 15-minute call can make a difference if it's regular and purposeful.
Right. It's like those moments become tradition, something your team looks forward to. And keeping it short, that's key. Busy calendars don't mean people can't join in, you know?
While digital tools and routines are fantastic, I think there's something uniquely impactful about pairing them with physical, tangible gestures. For instance, sending quarterly care packages to remote team members is one idea I've seen work remarkably well.
Oh, I love that idea because let's face it, who doesn't like getting a little surprise in the mail, right?
Exactly. Especially when those packages include something personal, local snacks, handwritten notes, or culturally significant items from different regions where team members are based. It says, "We see you, you matter," and it sparks this palpable sense of connection, even miles apart.
Oh, totally. And it's not just about the goodies either. It gives people a reason to share about their own culture or region. Like someone gets a snack from Tennessee and says, "Y'all, let me tell you about this thing called moon pies. I love moon pies."
Yeah, and those conversations create these natural segues into team bonding. It's like building a storybook of your team, page by page, through shared experiences.
Speaking of storybooks, what about an actual digital one? I mean, we've all seen some great examples of teams that create a digital handbook about their values, communication norms, even funny traditions and inside jokes. That sounds like another way to keep those connections alive, doesn't it?
Definitely. And those handbooks can become living, breathing documents. They serve as this cultural backbone, a touchstone for new and old team members alike. Plus, they reinforce what makes the team unique.
Exactly. Like, imagine being the new person and opening up this handbook filled with team stories and little quirks that just make you go, "Oh, wow, this team's got personality." It feels welcoming.
And the thing is, these aren't just nice to haves, they influence how teams perform over time. It comes down to measuring what works. Are people participating in the Slack channels? Are they showing up for those rituals we talked about earlier? Those are the indicators that tell you, hey, something's clicking here.
Right. And not just participation. How people feel about those initiatives matters. You've got to ask questions like, are folks more satisfied? Are they happier with their work environment? It's those metrics, combined with feedback, that'll show you if you're moving the needle or not.
Exactly. Surveys, retention rates, even just regular pulse checks, they all paint a picture. And when things aren't working, well, you tweak, adapt, and keep moving forward.
Totally. It's like remote culture isn't set it and forget it. It's something you cultivate. It's living, just like those handbooks we mentioned.
Right. And done well, these initiatives build trust, collaboration, and engagement. Things any team would want, whether remote or not.
Absolutely. And hey, while we're wrapping up, let me just say it's been such a fun conversation today. These ideas really show how remote teams aren't just surviving. When you put thought into it, they're thriving.
Well said. And on that note, folks, remember, building connections, even remotely, is one of the most rewarding investments you can make for your team.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see y'all in the next Pixels and Projects podcast episode.